Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where professionals in the attractions business can get tips, tools, and even a bit of inspiration.
Join us as we tackle some of the most important topics facing the attractions industry today and gain insights from some of the top leaders, creators, and influencers from the exciting world of theme parks, zoos, museums, aquariums, and family entertainment centers.
Because this show is created by Attraction Pros for Attraction Pros. I am Josh Liebman, Director of Business Development for Amusement Advantage. I help attractions understand and improve their guest experience.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead and work with attractions to increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and enjoy the leading resource for attractions industry professionals, the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going great, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing really well, doing very well. Very excited for our guest that we have today.
Roger Germann from the Florida Aquarium. Now, you have an interesting connection to him prior to this interview that I'm sure would be fascinating for everybody to hear.
Yeah, but you know what's funny, actually? Remember a few weeks ago when we did our intro to the interview that we did with Emily Howard, and the question that you asked me of, do I often strike up a conversation with people when I get on an airplane?
Exactly.
I said no. Yes, you're right. The connection that we have is that Roger met my wife on an airplane several years ago, about 4 years or so ago, and they struck up a conversation together, which ultimately resulted in her sending a follow-up email. He introduced me to some staff at the Shed Aquarium here in Chicago, and that's how I was able to get connected with them. But yeah, it's kind of funny to see it all come full circle.
Exactly. So, talking about Roger and his experience at Florida Aquarium, he came from Shed before that, but he's also got a really interesting background before that. And one of the things I'm really interested to talk to him about is kind of how all of that sort of amalgamated into what he's doing now and how that all sort of bubbled up to what he gets to do now, I guess, with the aquarium.
Right. Prior to working for Florida Aquarium, he worked for Shed Aquarium in Chicago. And prior to that, he was in the media industry, and then he was in politics for a little while. So it's definitely a career path that is, I would say, unique, especially compared to several other people that we talk to in the industry. And I think that that's an important component to talk about too, that he talks about how his career path, and for many career paths, that it's definitely not a linear process. There's a lot of moving parts to it. So it'll be really interesting to hear how he got to the position where he is today as president and CEO of the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, and the missions that he is passionate about, from animal conservation to developing his staff and his leadership, and from the Great Lakes to Tampa Bay, and even talking about Cuba's National Aquarium as well, and the partnership that they have together with the Florida Aquarium. And overall, this is just going to be a very interesting and enlightening conversation.
I think so. And should we get to it?
Let's get to it. Roger Germann, President and CEO of the Florida Aquarium in beautiful Tampa, Florida. Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, we're really excited to chat with you as well. So as we dive into this here, can you just give us a quick background and overview of just your career path in the industry and how you ended up at Florida Aquarium?
Sure, not a problem. One of the things I do try to remind folks, especially those young folks on the front lines, that for my career and many careers, it's not a linear approach. Matter of fact, growing up, I thought I was going to be an architect. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I was going to go through all of that. And in my junior year of college, I fell in love with mass communication and journalism and writing, and did an internship at the ABC affiliate up in Chicago. What's actually pretty cool is one of the very first programs I ever worked on was with a guy named Michael Jordan before they won anything, right? So here you're this young kid, and I'm like, I'm going to be this TV pro and I'll be a sportscaster and all of that. And then I decided, well, maybe I didn't want to go to a small town and start my career in a tiny market, but had an opportunity to work in television. And so I did work in TV in Chicago. I had a chance to go out to LA and work on a national TV show, came back to Chicago and ended up jumping over into politics, believe it or not, into kind of state government and politics. And from a press standpoint, things like C-SPAN were just coming online. So my background really merged well in the 90s. And then in 2000, just to kind of shorten it all, in 2000, I had an opportunity. I was on the road, probably somewhere in a hotel with a candidate or an elected official, and was going, maybe there's something else that's out there. But I loved what I did. Happened to call the Shedd Aquarium, and my sister, who's a teacher, needed some help with a field trip. And they had said, hey, by the way, you're in communications. If you know anybody, we're looking for, a comms director. I said, oh, if I know anybody, I'll let you know. It was the V8 moment that night of growing up in the city of Chicago. Said, it's the Shedd Aquarium. How cool is that? So I put my resume in. Rest is history. In 2000, joined the Shedd Aquarium. But what I will say is, to get me to here was, I did not even realize what the Shedd Aquarium or what museums, aquariums, zoos do, that they're so mission-based. My perspective was this really cool, fun place that you grew up at, you went on field trips, but I learned about the mission and what we can do to really, truly, make the world a better place. And so within that kind of first 6 to 8 months, I went to, the CEO of the Shedd Aquarium, Ted Beatty, and I said, I want to be you someday. I don't want to strive to be a CEO per se of the title, but I want to be you in a position where I can make a greater difference on the natural environment, on our community. And I felt that was a good platform. So thankfully, for about 17 years, he grew me up within the zoo, aquarium, attraction industry, learned how to really balance it all. And in 2017, had the opportunity to become the president and CEO of the Florida Aquarium here in beautiful Tampa.
That's very cool. Roger, I'm curious, thinking about all that different background before you got to the attractions industry, right? Broadcasting and politics. How has all that helped in what you're doing now?
It's a great question. And I actually think it's helped in many ways, because one is, when you're in the CEO role, oftentimes you are that ambassador, right? You are the face of the organization. So, kind of understanding, how to be able to talk in sound bites, being able to, communicate effectively, really looking at the words and the meaning, because we are storytellers. We're trying to tell the story of our mission. We're trying to connect to people. So I think that really, really played an important role. The other role that I think, especially in politics, played is, and we know that, in the political world, especially, you're looking at moving the needle on voters and audience. And so how you study your audiences is much different than some of the data-driven points that we have within the attraction industry. So being able to marry those two, I think, really helped. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, 30% of people vote, which means you're kind of really targeting the lowest denominator at times, right? You're looking for Joe Lunchbox or Jane Lunchbox. How do you get them to vote for you? But what you learn is the psychology of people and what motivates people. And so I think bringing that kind of communications, also kind of the political front lines, understanding people, has helped, both in my role at the Shedd Aquarium, but here at the Florida Aquarium as well. And, I often tell folks, even in their younger parts of their career, go work on a campaign somewhere, because I think the information and the experience that you can gain is really, truly invaluable. So they've all come together to mesh into, how do we talk about our mission? How do we talk about, the good work that we're doing here at the Florida Aquarium, and it works.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that psychology piece just for a second, because I'm really involved a lot in employee engagement. So it's similar, right? Because it's human beings, right? Whether you're trying to get them to vote for you or work for you. So I'm curious, what are some of those psychological tactics or strategies that you use and things you've learned over the years that can help motivate people to kind of do what you need them to do?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and they pride ourselves. When I got here, one of the things we wanted to work on was culture. Not necessarily that was bad, but it's the culture reflects the DNA of your leader, right? At the end of the day, and what was important. So having that authentic connection, it was really, really key. I think that's probably the biggest motivator. The fact that you walk in and your staff is watching you. I think of those fun things where my environmental service folks, when they're cleaning up my office, they know what I ate for lunch, right? Whether I know it or not. So they're paying attention to it. So walk that walk, talk the talk. Really mean what you believe. You know, one example that I use, it's a simple example, but you know, we've got behind the scenes areas here. We've got animals that are here. We've got great protocols in place. You know, but it can be easy to say, oh, well, that's just a penguin exhibit, and you know, maybe I'll walk in. And you know, I've reminded everybody here from my perspective that the Florida Aquarium comes first and animal welfare comes first. It doesn't matter what my title is. I just don't walk into an exhibit. I go through the channels, and people started looking, going, oh, okay, I get it. So just being positive, being out there on the floor, being connected, being that more spiritual leader. You know, the one evolution I've had to do, and many CEOs probably say the same thing, is, you know, when you move up, to me, I'm Roger. I don't know any other way. To my friends, I'm Roger. But that CEO title walks in that room before I do, and it's been that part of that transition to understand that. So we are a family here at the Florida Aquarium. We treat each other like a family, and we just try to walk that walk and talk the talk, because I think that the motivating piece is making sure people feel they are part of the story and connected. Just like I was 6 months into it at the Shed Aquarium, said I had no idea. Oh my gosh, I want to be it. You know, our 240 staff members that are here, you know, feel that they are part of something and that we can make a difference together.
So with that family environment and making everyone feel like they are part of it, at the time of this recording, you're currently closed as a result of coronavirus, COVID-19. Our entire industry is shut down. What have you been doing, whether it's adapting your leadership style or otherwise, kind of keeping that family still close together in a time when we cannot physically be together?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we've focused on collectively as the aquarium, but also on the personal side of that. One is, you know, the culture here is about communications and transparency. And so we had that going into it, and we are continuing that. One of the things that I'm fortunate enough to hear over time is, thanks for, again, keeping us in the loop, keeping us transparent. We've put mechanisms in place because we are physically distant at times, where we have a thing called the daily high. And so it's the, kind of that high five once a day where people are, either getting a motivational passage, or we're sharing photos from your office and your desk and trying to still create that community. From me personally, from my perspective, there's a couple things that have played out. One is I just recently, for staff, I wrote handwritten notes to every staff member, all 240, put them in the mail, and so they got it at their house, and just the little words of encouragement. We've got volunteer week is here, and so 500 plus volunteers are getting a note from me later this week, just again at their house. So there are things that we can do to stay connected. I've done videos, where I've emailed out, every couple of weeks I might do a video like, hey, so you can physically see each other. About ready to launch what's kind of, Coffee with Roger, where it will be a Zoom, and it'll be opened up, and it'll be 1 hour like every other week, where anyone can dial in and just share a story, ask a question. Those are things there. The second piece that I would say is just from a business strategy standpoint. So as things were going down and we knew we had to close, we did like everybody did. We kind of looked at the first 2 weeks and said, all right, fine, March 16th through March 29th, like everybody in the attraction world was saying, because we didn't know, we're closed and we're going to pay all of our staff. When we got closer to the 29th, we knew that it wasn't going, no one's going to be reopened anytime soon. But we took an interesting approach. The approach we took was, we then said, well, let's pick a date that's a little bit farther out. Let's look. And so we said May 10th was, we were going to at least be closed through May 10th, in line with the CDC's 8-week recommendation that came out earlier in March. And I know a lot of my colleagues were saying like, well, that doesn't provide hope or do whatever. Here's why we did it. We did it for 2 reasons. We wanted to extend that runway. Number one, we knew we could open up quickly. We have all the staff that's in place. They're the best in the business. And so if we can open up earlier, we will be open, trust me. But by putting the May 10th out there, we did 2 things. One is our staff members, and especially in this industry, as you know, where they're all connected to each other and they hear what their other bosses and companies are doing. It provided them with some security. And we basically looked and said, look, unless the ceiling drops out and something really drastic happens, we're going to pay you and pay your benefits, until May 10th. And that's 240 employees who knew, that they can now breathe a little easier. And that was one. 2 was for the senior staff. That was my audience. Public wasn't my audience. My audience was staff. 2 is the senior staff. We've been working 24 hours a day for those 2 weeks figuring out how this looks. I want them to sleep. I wanted them to breathe. And why that was also important is once they started breathing, then we've got the senior staff and our staff. And the charge that I gave everybody was be innovative over this time, because it's going to take 20 people to keep this place open, the animals fed, and the air conditioning working. But that leaves me with 220 other employees who are working remotely. And so we said, this is a time, we've given you this longer runway, be innovative, be creative. Think of what the Florida Aquarium should be if it's not the Florida Aquarium as we know it today. And I'm pleased to say, at least at this point, we're really thinking through so much of what the Florida Aquarium could be and or should be when we have a chance to reopen to the public. So that's one of the ways to engage from a CEO standpoint, is inspire, give them big, lofty goals, those audacious goals of innovate, but let them just go do what they want to do. So again, they feel they are part of building the Florida Aquarium. I often say that, when I came on board, we went to a new chapter in the book, not a new book. So together we're writing this new chapter.
What have you seen from this innovation and creativity that you're putting out there? What's come back from that so far?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I mean, we're still in the early stages of a couple weeks, but one thing is in the fundraising camp. One of our biggest fundraisers is on May 30th, and we started looking at that and trying to keep the normalness of fundraisers, as we saw most people were taking their fundraisers and just moving them to another date. And so we were trying to figure out how that would look, and with the uncertainty and unknown as to whether we can physically get together by that time, we started saying, wait a second here, let's turn this thing upside down. Let's not try to, even if we're open and it's full bore, we should be good enough to be able to have people come here physically to the Florida Aquarium, because that's where we host the fundraiser. But now the folks have have figured out a whole virtual fundraiser that doesn't do the kind of the Zoom type or the Facebook Live, I should say, type where it's just pushing out. Some of the ideas are looking at platforms that aren't even explored at higher levels, but we might decide to be the guinea pig on a technology platform that creates community and builds all these little rooms, and all of a sudden you feel like you're at the fundraiser. We're talking with sponsors and vendors. What can we get into the hands of people at their homes so they feel like they're here? So fundraising has definitely been one of those areas that we focused on from an event standpoint. Two is we're looking at the aquarium. We have an interesting way to explore the aquarium. It actually has kind of a pathway that you can walk down, but you don't have to physically do it. But some of the staff members are saying now, well, if we come back online and we can only have X amount of people in the building, what if we have tour guides? And what if we create something totally different? And now it's a deeper dive valued experience that, rather than running into an educator on the floor or a docent, you may actually have a whole tour that does two things. It even takes our mission to another level, but also deals with some of the perceptions and realities we're going to have to deal with in this new world of Corona.
Yeah, no, and that's really cool. It's really exciting to kind of see all those juices flowing from your staff when they otherwise don't necessarily have the time to kind of pull back and be able to sort of kind of look at it from that 30,000 foot view when they're right there in the daily operations every day. Going back to the fundraising component,
Sure.
This is something I'm kind of curious about. Are you finding it to be a challenge to push fundraising from your mission right now while everyone, there's definitely a lot of charitable and philanthropic messages being put out there, I would say, by society, but it's very much focused into kind of the issue of today and like supporting healthcare workers and, as far as like food for homeless who aren't able to, to get it right now, and with social distancing and with all of that. And this is almost kind of, this was inspired by a personal challenge that I'm having. I'm actually fundraising for an organization called Project Aware. I'm running the Chicago Marathon in October, and I was active in trying to ask people, hey, come on and donate. And I felt like I had to kind of bring that to a grinding halt to say, okay, I need to wait for this to be over before I can start reaching out to my friends and family to ask them for even a small donation again. Are you seeing a similar type of challenge, or are people just as excited as they were pre-pandemic to contribute to animal conservation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, look, I think we're still learning a lot through this navigating these waters, right? So we're talking about the societal waters, but you're exactly right, the fundraising waters, the philanthropy waters. Look, here's been our approach across the board. One of the things we've been done really, really well here at the Florida Aquarium, I think in the last few years, is we've re-engaged in community. So you have the pillars of what you stand for, and animal welfare and conservation and education, and kind of that entertainment and engagement piece. But the fifth one we added more recently is community. And why I bring that up is because we've been more tied into our community than maybe we have in the past. And we are working with other nonprofits, Feeding Tampa Bay. We opened up a moon jelly touch exhibit, and, putting together a promotion that says, it's the peanut butter and jelly program, because Feeding Tampa Bay doesn't have, peanut butter is one of the biggest commodities that they need. And so we become more in tune with our nonprofit partners. And why I say that is because we're regularly talking with them, and we're trying to make sure we're navigating this water together, that we can lift all boats. I believe that the fact that even in good times, we should be lifting all boats and supporting each other, and not so territorial. And so because we have that lens and bent on that, I think we've been able to navigate some of the philanthropic waters a little bit different. The other thing that we have going for us, maybe than some of the other areas, is the fact that we've been in a growth mode over the last 2 years, and we have been, we've been doing better at the gate in earned revenue. We've been doing better in philanthropy, and so we're in a stronger position. And so when we are going to market, we are evolving every few weeks with something new to help us. But it's not that desperation message, right? So it's not walking out there and saying, hey, if you don't give X today, we can't do Y. We're talking about all the things that we're doing, but really looking more to the future and for hope. So we do a lot in coral conservation. We have many breakthroughs that are happening. We were the globally first to breed coral recently, but Atlantic coral, I should say, human care. But one of the things we talk about is that, this is going to pass, and you're going to go to the Florida Keys at some point. So your investments that we've done wisely can still bring a future of hope, to save wildlife, to educate more kids. And so our messaging has been, in tune with the community, understanding who really needs it, maybe more. We need it, but who might need it more, and not step on those toes, be coordinated. And then the second piece is really about, it's a position of strength, and it's about investing in the future. That we're all going to get back again to normal at some point, and not the moment of, without this we can't do. I think that's the messaging is going to be really key for us right now.
Yeah. And so a lot of that messaging really started long before the pandemic, right? I don't want to say this is business as usual, but in some ways, you're continuing with your message and your mission, just in a different way, right? That's kind of what it seems like you're talking about there.
I 100% agree. I mean, look, I learned this at the Shed Aquarium. I learned this from the political days, and we're doing it here at the Florida Aquarium. You want to have your value message out there, why you exist, and what value you have. And so you're right. I mean, the last several years here at the Florida Aquarium, we have been talking about the value and every one of those buckets. And so what we're creating is this affinity for the Florida Aquarium, not this transactional nature where it's, I buy a ticket, or maybe they, hit me up with a compelling appeal letter in my mail, and, here's $50. We're trying to have this deeper sense of, we are your Florida Aquarium. We are the Florida Aquarium. And what's the role that we play? So you're exactly right, Matt. I mean, one of the things we're talking, that's what's resonating. And so when we can go back to our investors, and the donors, and say, we've invested this wisely, when we can go to the public, I mean, part of our growth strategy just at the gate has been connecting with our local audience to say, you may have been here 25 years ago, or you may have been here last week, but we serve an important role for community and for you, and people are seeing that. So I think, again, that message in fundraising and philanthropy resonates a little differently, because we have the affinity and the connectivity that is so important, both pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and we see it happening coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about community and the raising all boats philosophy, because one of the things that as I was looking into some of your background, obviously you've been involved with politics and things like that, and even now, as you know, being with Shed and Florida Aquarium, you're still involved with sort of, you know, policy making and things that are more global than just your institution. And I'm wondering, you know, how do you develop that mindset to be so globally minded, so that it also helps your institution and not, like you said, just be so focused on your own institution that you're kind of siloed from others?
Well, I think I was just very blessed over time. And so I think that you can, for leaders to, you know, there's leadership books, there's, you know, being able to come in and look at, hang out with you guys and learn from other leaders. And I learn from other leaders, but, you know, part of it, I guess would answer is, I grew up in the southwest side of the city of Chicago in a blue collar, hard scrabble family. And, you know, my dad worked hard as a railroad guy. My mom was a public school teacher, you know, in Chicago. And so, you know, that upbringing was always about to whom much is given, much is required. My mom, again, served, public teaching, is for the greater good of the public. My sister's a public school teacher up in Chicago as well. And then I moved forward, right? I have an opportunity to work in television, but some of the things that I worked on, I talked about the Michael Jordan show earlier, but, I worked on documentaries oftentimes, about things from, drunk driving. And I just saw this societal opportunity that we should be giving back again, and the to whom much is given required. Then in politics, you really do that. And while I say politics, I also work for government, which is a public service opportunity. And I saw the greater good. My wife is very involved in public policy and state government, and was an agency director in healthcare up in Illinois when we were up there. So for us, even just as a family, our DNA is to always give back, always be part of the community. And we've seen, our families, our friends all rise when we rise together. And so I think a lot of it has to be upbringing. At the Shed, we saw it the same way, and I see it here. I mean, again, one of the things we did right at the pandemic. So think of it this way: we're a nonprofit organization, and no one's coming through our doors, which basically meant, that financial cash flow is totally dried up. But we were watching a lot of our friends in the restaurant world really, really suffer, and so it's looking at the greater good. So I want my team of 20 people who are caring for animals. Well, it was more at the time, and then we shrunk it down. But, my folks who are caring for animals who are putting in 10, 12 hours a day, to be safe and to be fed. And sometimes they can't get to the grocery store. So why not bring lunches in? And so we were able to bring lunches in for our staff, which was a good benefit for staff. On the same token, we were contacting restaurants who were just going, I can't make payroll. Now, I went to them all and said, look, don't send me over your catering rate because I have no money coming in. But on the same token, can we work it out? And that was that sense of, again, giving back to community. If we can keep the restaurants afloat and our community afloat for however long, that's a big deal, because those are folks who are going to come to the Florida Aquarium and at some point, or go to other places. So, I think part of it's just the DNA that I grew up with, and I try to apply that to, what I think this organization can be and why I wanted to sit in the CEO role. Again, it wasn't for title, but what can we have the greater good? I want to leave this planet, not just environmentally and wildlife-wise, but community-wise, better than when I came on in 1969 to inherit it.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story about working with the local restaurants and really just acknowledging, hey, we're all in this together. What can we do to be able to continually support each other? And then along these similar lines too, you've been very active and very vocal and passionate about preservation of the Great Lakes, and more recently, of course, Tampa Bay. I've read some of your articles in Huffington Post. What inspired this passion?
Well, again, so I've always had a passion for again, making the world a better place, and I probably put a lot of those passions in my early part of my career towards things, coaching kids and making them better, or volunteering at a food pantry over on Thanksgiving. But once I really truly got into this industry and started working at the Shed Aquarium, even when I was in government, I had a different passion. But when I got to the Shed Aquarium, I realized, how intertwined we are with environment and wildlife, and the important role that we can play in that. Matter of fact, when you think about this pandemic right now, it really shows the intersections of animals and humans and even just our general health. So growing up in Chicago, you look out your backyard, you turn the faucet on, you see things, in your backyard. And Shed's commitment at the time was to do conservation around the globe. But we also got to the point where, like, wait a minute, one of the biggest kind of environmental treasures is right in our backyard, and 90% of fresh water in North America is in the Great Lakes. Maybe we ought to do something here. And so that just became very, very close and near and dear to the heart, on many ways. And then here at the Florida Aquarium, what's unique is we're on the front lines here of a lot of work that's happening. Again, the coral reefs that we are working on are right here in our backyard, so to speak, here in the Keys. And the sea turtles that we rescue and save are right here in our aquatic neighborhoods, as I like to call them, right here in the Bay, that many people, interact with. So it's become that kind of personal passion and commitment, whether it's Great Lakes and when I was living there and involved, or, here in Florida, making sure, again, that our environment, that our natural resources, and this connection to nature, which we've lost in this urban world, remains solid. Because I do believe wholeheartedly that, getting dirt under your fingernails is a good thing. And we ought to be out there in nature appreciating it more and social distancing has been tough because everybody's locked in their homes, right? And we're doing all this electronic stuff, but I don't ever want to get to the point where, our world becomes a Wall-E, right? That we're living in, we're getting all of our stuff and we're looking for that tiny plant again. We don't have to get there.
Yeah. It's interesting, Roger, you talk about, being locked in our homes and things. And based on my business that serves the attractions business, I've actually had a little extra time to get my hands dirty, outside and almost reinvigorating my passion for going and playing in the dirt. I mean, I remember when I was younger, one of the things I asked my parents for was a pile of dirt. For my birthday. And they're like, we can get you dirt, So I wanted to go play in the dirt. And I had this sort of memory as I was working on this little creek near our house. And I was just kind of laying some rocks in there. I'm like, this is cool. This is connecting me to something that's not a computer screen, not electronic, but something that is so fundamental to who we are as a species that, of course, we have to be connected to that. So I love hearing that message from you, and I think this has actually helped me get more connected to that to the earth, if you will.
Yeah, and I'm assuming if you're like me, you walk outside and maybe you do those evening walks or a bike ride where you're distant enough and you're going, I didn't know that person even lived in that house, right? Because everybody seems to be kind of coming out and doing a little bit of that as well. But that's great that you can connect in nature in your backyard or around the corner. And again, I think we all hope that people are doing that. And probably by being stuck in your house, maybe you, again, have more of a tendency maybe to walk outside and at least breathe some, fresh air and recognize how we are connected and rely on nature and just that interconnection.
Totally. Yeah. One of the things you mentioned a few minutes ago was the importance of the coral reefs. And I think that's a good segue into talking about your partnership between Florida Aquarium and Cuba's National Aquarium. Yeah. And I know that was one of the big initiatives that I believe you took on when you first came to Tampa on the Florida Aquarium. Can you share a little bit about how that partnership was formed and I would say just the overall importance of it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the things that have there was a question earlier about globalization, and we're clearly seeing that today, whether it's the economy, whether it's wildlife or whatever. But wildlife knows no borders, right? That doesn't know political decision making and customs and things like that. So what became very clear to us was that we have this beautiful Florida reef tract that runs kind of from Fort Lauderdale all the way down through the Keys, through the Dry Tortugas, and it's the third largest barrier reef in the world. And even growing up here in the United States in Chicago, I didn't realize that at all until I got here. Like, the third largest, that's huge. But what you see is, again, this interconnectivity in these relations. And what became very, very clear is when we talk about, we may talk politically that, Cuba's 90 miles away, but you're going, wait a minute here. Those coral reefs and those fish and everything are really, really more interconnected, than we ever thought. So as as some of the kind of tensions and regulations eased up a little bit, the thought is to coordinate and work with the aquarium down there that's doing a lot of great things on the front lines of science and research and climate change. And we felt like they were probably the closest partner to the work we were doing, because Lord knows you can put all this time and energy into rebuild the Florida reef tract. And if there's something happening, less than 90 miles away, that's just going to come in and destroy it. well, that's all in vain. And so I think that, again, that in conservation, all of us have looked at, again, there's no political state borders, country borders, and try to look at it holistically. So that was really one of the impetus for creating this partnership with the folks in Cuba, and how do we share information back and forth. The biggest thing for us is that we're able to share cutting edge information with them to make sure that their reefs remain protected in many ways. And then on the other side, because their reefs are a little more resilient to heat, and so when water's warm, can we learn something from them that applies to here?
So I'm curious, certainly dealing with another aquarium in the United States would be one thing, right? But dealing with an aquarium in another country, I'm guessing were different waters to navigate. So can you kind of walk us through that process a little bit?
I can't believe I'm going to cough. I lose my voice. There you go. One of the interesting things about that, though, is it's the passion and commitment to the mission, right? And so while you have to work through some political maybe barriers when you show up and get a visa approved or not, the reality is the folks who are on the front lines trying to save coral reefs or trying to save wildlife, they have the same passion we do. So when you walk into the room, even with a language barrier, the reality of it is that we're all in it together. We all know why we're here, and it's just, you roll up your sleeves, no different across a country borders as it would be if I was working with somebody in California or New York or Illinois. So that's the good news. We all have a shared mission to protect and preserve our blue planet. Coral reefs, in this case, where our connectivity is a very much of a passion of ours. So it's worked out actually pretty well. The hardest thing, again, is more of the regulatory things, as well as the fact that we're fundraising here to grow coral, to get equipment. In a country like Cuba, unfortunately, it's a little bit tougher to get equipment there to be able to do the same things that we are doing. So part of this relationship is really trying to help them in best practices, and where we can have equipment brought in that can help them, because at the end of the day, if we work together, we know it creates a better world.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears just a little bit here, all three of us here are very active on Twitter, and I really enjoy following your Twitter account, because it seems like it's this motivational index of quotes of the day. And I'm curious if this is something that, do you plan these out in advance, and do you schedule them using Hootsuite or something like that to make sure there's one every single day? Or is it very much just inspired on events of the day? Because when I see it, it all seems to be very current and timely.
Yeah, so I started that, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. I think it was during one of the it may have been during it was pre this last campaign. It may have even gone back several campaigns on the political front. And so for me, it was very personal, because again, I mean, there's no problems, only solutions is the thing that you can hear around our house, as well as you can hear at the aquarium. And I have always been a glass half full guy. And I think positivity should rule the day, not finger pointing. I think we can figure things out to make things better. So long story on that is, it's, I'm gonna go back probably about 6 years ago. And I just really got tired of people just shouting at each other, from both sides of the political aisles, especially on Twitter, Facebook. They were opening up these, I think people were just using these as, as platforms and echo chambers, and it just was nasty. So I said, you know what, that's just not who I am, and I will not engage by any means. But what can I do, again, to improve the quality of life and for the greater good? So I'd wake up every morning, and I'd go search for quotes, I'd go search for inspirational, motivational pieces, and I started posting them. And then what I found out over time was people started sending me personal notes and just saying, thanks, it's what I needed today, or keep it up. And I was like, okay, so now it really has become part of that personal DNA of, I want to put something out there that inspires, again, that changes the world every day. So yes, I do those every morning. They are not scripted, or they're not planned. I have a whole method to my madness of how many things I look at. So I can get up at 5:45 or 6 a.m. I might spend the first 20 minutes just surfing all kinds of stuff. What do I feel? What have I seen that's trended out there that might be an inspiration? And I try to find a quote. So I do actually roll up my sleeves every day to work on what that looks like for the day. But it'll always happen. And I still get, again, notes regularly of people saying, thank you, whether it resonated that day or just continuing to be positive. So it's kind of become the brand.
Do you find that having this as part of your morning routine kind of, does it set the stage for the rest of the day? Do you notice it if you don't do it? How important is this consistency?
Yeah, no, it's extremely important because it does a couple things. One is, as I'm researching every day, again, it's not like you're pulling something. So I'm researching. So I'm looking at multiple quotes. I mean, it could be in the morning, I'm looking at something from, FDR to, to Plato to something. I mean, but those things, I absorb those, right? So it becomes part of my DNA and how I look at how I'm going to navigate the day, the week, and, there's some inspirational moments there. So it definitely, benefits me in many ways. And secondly is, again, just for my DNA, if I can make the world, even for a fraction of a moment, and somebody reading a tweet better, it just motivates me and puts a hop in my step. It's why I do in the morning as well, so you can start off fresh. And if I have that hop in the step, I think it makes me a better leader with my staff, makes me a better dad, makes me a better husband. So, so it really is all part of that. The biggest challenge for me, honestly, is sometimes there are quotes that resonate, and I have to go back to my title. And what I mean by that is I never want a staff member or somebody else who's reading that to read into something, right? So if there's some kind of something that's out there, and later that day I put out an email for something, and they're going, oh, well, that's what he was trying to tell us. I'm like, no. So I actually have to put that filter on more. And so those are absorbed inside of like, okay, failure's not a problem today. But if we did something wrong at the aquarium, I didn't want him to think like, oh, he's covering up for it. So that's the bigger challenge.
It's a subtweet, right?
It is. I have to find that little echo chamber group of mine, like, oh, I saw this really great quote. But when it goes viral in public, it is one of those things where I do pay a little more attention at times. So it does become either self-reflective at times or somebody reads too much into it. Because, I mean, the one thing that I do is don't read into anything that's being said, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love, Roger, how you're talking about being so positive and that being, having an impact on you, but also having an impact on yourself. And, before we started recording, we were talking about you being in the CEO role, and that sometimes that can actually be a lonely position, right? A lot of people aspire to it and say, that's what I want to do, but they don't really know what it's like to be in that role. So can you talk a little bit about that and how your positivity may help you through those times when it's a little more lonely at the top?
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think that all of the folks, especially in the leadership roles, and when you get to that president, CEO role, executive director, that top spot, it's very true. You're probably one of the most popular people in the world. Everybody wants you to come to their event. Everybody wants this and that. They're asking you for stuff. Your emails are clogged with, can you donate ticket? Well, on the same token, it's exactly right. It's probably one of the most loneliest spots in the world, and it's tough at times. I'm very blessed in my world that I have a great kind of what I call shadow CEO at home, and my wife. Very accomplished in her own world and an executive, and it's nice to have that. I've also can surround myself with a couple other CEOs and leaders across the country and around the globe, where we can have those fun moments where you can let your hair down. I don't have much, but you can let your hair down, right? And just and be able to just kind of share frustrations and stories. But the other part of that is, even if you don't have those, I think that is probably one of the traits and DNAs, at least for me, that's been a success, is how can I internalize and how can I process and how can I take care of myself? And so when you talk about the quotes early on, again, I might read 24 quotes every morning and one goes up. But those are inspiring me just to, okay, today's okay, or it'll be fine. Some of the things I've been studying more recently is on the Great Depression. Trying to find any similarities to what we're having here. And when you start looking at some of the CEOs of how they handled it, it helps me. So I say, you got to internalize a little bit. You have to find a small group you can talk with, but always stay the course. And I always try to remind my folks, I have the biggest fat lip of anybody. So I when people are trying to aspire to this role, I say, make sure when you walk into an organization, your communications team takes your headshot on day one, because by the time you get to 2 weeks in, you've got the biggest fat lip if you're doing it right, because you have to be quiet, you have to listen, and even when you want to just be funny, you may not be able to do it as much. So I love it. I love the role. I think it's I relish in it. Not for everybody, but if you can do it well, I think it reflects in your business operations and reflects in what people think about your organization.
What advice would you give to yourself early on, whether it was in the media part of the career, or maybe even beginning at Shed, when you knew that you aspired to be in the executive role and take on that responsibility, not just that title? What would you tell yourself, or what would you tell someone in that same position to be able to set themselves up for that type of success?
One of the things I tell people is hard work and hustle, and don't think linear. And also don't expect. I guess there's a couple of things, right? And don't expect. I mean, work really hard to establish yourself. Work really hard to have a goal in mind, and just try to follow that dream. And don't let anything limit you. But there isn't a linear path to get there. And that's, so I lived it. And nobody really kind of ultimately, I mean, some people may have said it a little bit, but didn't say it as bluntly. But what I tell people today is, don't have a linear path. Again, I have a mass comm journalism poli-sci degree, started working in television, went into state government, city government politics, all of the above. And, now I'm sitting here running, one of the best aquariums in the world. And you wouldn't think that. But I worked hard. I created that brand, and part of that working hard was not only on a project, but how can I expand my portfolio, all along the way. And I think if you want to keep moving up, it's recognizing that. And it sounds very cliche because everybody says work hard, but try not to limit yourself, both in a career path, but also just what you focus on. Because I know I interview, so classic example, when I interview somebody, whether it was previously when I was an executive vice president or VP, or now the president and CEO, one of the questions I ask people is, do you want my job? And they look at me and they're like, they don't want to answer that right at that moment. And I'm like, no, that's a legitimate answer. I'm not telling you you're going to get my job tomorrow, but if I know where you want to go and how you want to get there, then I or this organization can help you get there. And so that's, again, the same thing. It's just, is just putting it out there. When I went to my boss at the Shed Aquarium, 6-8 months in and said, I want to be you someday, he knew at that moment what I wanted to do. And that took 17 years, but he worked and groomed me, and I was very patient, to get to there. So I hope people just work hard, being clear in their intentions of where they want to be, and have that patience.
And Roger, why do you think some people might be hesitant to say, yes, I do want your job, even though they may inside actually want it? They may want to be president and CEO, but they're afraid to say it to you or to anybody.
Yeah, I think, well, I think it's, human nature. I mean, unfortunately, and we have a lot of folks who are in leadership roles in multiple layers, which maybe aren't as comfortable in their own skin, or they don't have a self-awareness, or even in some cases, they have their own motivation and it's not seeing the big picture. I mean, at least for me, I look at, and I tell everybody, is the Florida Aquarium is bigger than the president and CEO. It's bigger than any employee here. So that's how I look at this organization. And so for me, it's not about an ego. It's not about, I want to know that. I want to help people. And quite frankly, I was very blessed to have Ted Beatty, who was my mentor and president and CEO of the Shed Aquarium for so long. Because if you were to talk with Ted today and all the great things the Shed Aquarium did over time, and you were to say, Ted, what are you most proud of? He won't say that it was saving a species of animal and deer. What he's most proud of is he's got, I think it's 11 now, 11 of his staff members who are in executive level CEO type roles across the country. That's what he's most proud of. And I kind of have that same vein, maybe growing up as a child of a public school teacher, but I want to inspire folks. I want everybody to be here part of the Florida Aquarium and help us be the best we can be. But if one of my staffers or two of my staffers or three of them go on to be successful CEOs or whatever, that's a huge reflection on this organization and myself and as a CEO and as a leader. So I'm not scared of somebody telling me that. And I think that's the key. And I'm not motivated by, knocking people down so I get what I want. So I think, again, human nature is we can be too hang on too much to wanting what we want and not realizing that, again, you can raise all boats and everybody can have their cake and eat it too some days.
Yeah.
So as we kind of start to wind this down here, one final question here, and I admit I'm borrowing this one from Tim Ferriss. I'm a big fan of his podcast, and I have to revise it a little bit based on the times. But if you could put any message on a billboard, whether real or virtual, that is non-commercial in a, he would normally say Times Square, but I'll just say in a densely populated real or virtual area, what would it say?
Ooh, that's a good one. So now you're going back to my quotes for the mornings and do whatever. Look, I think for the times that we're in, with the reality of it is this too shall pass. And I think that wholeheartedly, life's going to go on. It's maybe the current normal, new normal, whatever you want to call it, but this too shall pass. I think would be the biggest motivation I have. And so it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of the opportunity now, knowing that we need to be better people and citizens. And as this passes, what are we going to do with the short time that we have, on this planet? So this will pass. We'll get through it all together. And if we stay focused on what our priorities are, I think the world will be a better place.
Awesome. Well, Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. If people wanted to reach out to you, to whether it's say hi on social media, or if they wanted to learn more about Florida Aquarium, where would you send them?
Sure, yeah. So from a Florida Aquarium standpoint, you can go to our website, flaquarium.org. It's a great place to go. We have our Twitter channels, we have our Facebook channels, we have our Instagram channels, and I'm connected through all of those as well, so you can easily find me. But I've got Rajman on Twitter. I've got my own Facebook. You can just type in my name, Roger Germann, German with 2 N's, and you can find me that way. Or feel free again through our website to send me emails, call. I'm happy to chat with anybody over time and share my thoughts, as well as learn from a lot of folks that are out there. So please reach out and get connected with the Florida Aquarium. We're doing great things here and happy to share it with the world.
Excellent. Well, we really enjoyed chatting with you today. We really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. And as usual, for everyone out there listening, thanks for being Attraction Pros.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Attraction Pros podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and make sure to follow us on all the social channels.
And make sure you've subscribed to the show so you can get the latest episodes every single week. Also, if you're new to the show, be sure to check out all the great episodes and guests we've featured in the past.
And if you want to learn more about Matt and Josh and check out the best articles for you to operate your attraction most successfully, be sure to visit us at attractionpros.com.